Margaret Harper woke before dawn to the same sterile hum of the air conditioner in her nursing home room, but this morning a bitter certainty tightened her chest. She had always known that her daughters, Elena and Sophie, would decide her fate when she could no longer manage her arthritis and heart trouble. Yet she felt a stab of betrayal realizing how easily they had sold her beloved brick cottage behind her back. The house where she and Peter had built a life together, where laughter and sorrow had intertwined through decades, was gone. Auctioned to the highest bidder for debts they claimed she couldn't pay. She rose slowly from the narrow twin bed, each joint protesting, and dressed in the floral cotton dress she had brought, smoothing its faded petals over her thin frame. On the bedside table stood a faded photograph of her younger self and Peter on their wedding day, he in a spotless suit, she in a lace gown that trailed lightly behind her. Their eyes glowed with hope. At the bottom of the frame she had carefully etched, "Forever, 1945. That forever now carved pain into her heart. Through the small window, a robin hopped across a patch of wilted grass, intent on gathering twigs for its nest. Nature carried on, but in Margaret's world, everything felt suspended. The cottage, once filled with the aroma of fresh bread and pie crusts, held the echoes of her children's childhood laughter. It was the shelter where Peter had cradled her through sleepless nights and whispered love songs. Now the keys were gone, handed over by her own daughters, who insisted a nursing home was safer. As she sauntered toward the door, she paused to glance at the room's pale walls, identical to every other room in the building. A nurse entered with a tray of tea and toast. "Good morning, Mrs. Harper," she murmured. Margaret smiled politely, but her eyes burned. This room, these walls, could never replace her home. She picked up the porcelain cup, its handle cold against her fingers, and took a slow sip. Tea had never tasted so bitter. At breakfast, long tables filled with residents shuffling to their seats. The smell of oatmeal and weak coffee promised no comfort. Mrs. Jacobs, her nearest neighbor, recited a prayer under her breath. Mr. Blake stooped in silence, stared at a bowl, lost in thought. Margaret forced herself to sit beside them, but her appetite had vanished. Lily, a bright-eyed volunteer, distributed newspapers. Margaret accepted one, unfolding its pages to a headline that made her heart twist: Local heritage house sold to commercial developers. The article included a small photo of her own cottage, now draped in a sold banner, slated for demolition to build trendy loft apartments. She traced the printed image with a trembling finger, blood pounding in her ears. How unfortunate, Lily murmured, noticing Margaret's white-knuckled grip. Margaret managed a thin smile. I once lived there. The words felt numb. She sank back into her seat, aware of stares from other residents. Guilt flickered. How could she feel anger over a building when she had her health, a roof overhead? But the cottage was more than bricks and timber. It housed her history, her identity, the home she shared with Peter. And her daughters had sold it without so much as a phone call. After breakfast, Lily guided Margaret to the reading nook. Today's selection, Robert Frost's Out, Out. About a boy's fleeting life snatched away by tragedy. Margaret squeezed her eyes shut as Lily's words washed over her. She felt tears prick at the edges, tears not only of loss but of betrayal. When Lily finished, she folded the pages gently and laid them on Margaret's lap. Take your time, she whispered. Margaret nodded, swallowing hard. The poem's final lines haunted her. Little, less, nothing. And that ended it. In that moment, she realized she would not let her life end as nothing. A new resolve kindled in her chest, a desire to reclaim dignity, to feel that her history still mattered. In the recreation room, a checkers game was in progress. Mr. Blake set up the board before Margaret arrived, his movements careful, deliberate. She settled into the wheelchair and positioned herself across from him. The afternoon sun slanted through tall windows, making the dust motes dance. Mr. Blake smiled weakly. Ready, Margaret? Margaret nodded, her mind adrift in thoughts of revenge. She remembered how Elena had insisted, you can't manage on your own, and Sophie's firm nod as they had signed all the paperwork. Now they ran off to a distant city, their own lives busy, never once looking back. Margaret moved her red piece, capturing one of Mr. Blake's black pieces. He chuckled, surprised. You're quite the player. She offered a faint smile. I learned from your strategy years ago. The small victory brought a flicker of satisfaction. If she could still outmaneuver a sprightly 90-year-old in checkers, perhaps she could outmaneuver her daughters in other ways. The thought brought a cold thrill. Later, volunteers rearranged tables for an art session. Lily showed up with watercolor paints. Margaret studied the paper, her hands shaking. She dipped the brush into crimson and began painting a single red rose emerging from tangled thorns. At first her strokes wavered, but then became firmer. As the rose took shape, she felt a surge of defiance. Though her home was gone, her spirit would bloom, even among thorns. Lily set the painting aside to dry. Margaret watched it, a silent promise forming. This mother would not fade quietly into the background. The rose was a symbol, a testament to love, pain, and the determination to exact her own justice. Late that evening, after the nursing home's corridors had hushed and the residents settled for the night, Margaret lay in bed, mulling over her options. She thought of Elena, now ensconced in her comfortable apartment in Chicago, and Sophie juggling 2 adolescent sons and a high-powered job. They had convinced themselves she would be better off, but they underestimated her. If they thought they could erase her legacy so easily, they were sorely mistaken. Margaret reached for a small leather-bound journal stashed beneath her pillow. In it, she wrote a precise plan. Gather proof of how they had benefited financially from selling her home, locate witnesses to attest that she did not willingly consent, communicate with her late husband's war comrades who detested dishonor, and finally set in motion a sequence of events that would force Elena and Sophie to confront the mess they had made. Each bullet point filled her with strength. Her pulse drummed. No more passive acceptance. She wrote about how she would contact an old friend back in her hometown, Wilfred Willie Thompson, now a local reporter, who had once vowed to protect the Harper family's honor. She would ask him to investigate the cottage sale. She would write letters to the press, telling her side of the story. Elena and Sophie had counted on her silence, on her frailty. They had not realized that age did not equate to helplessness. Her pen hovered over the journal as she drafted a short letter to Willie, describing the betrayal in poignant detail and asking him to expose their duplicity. As she read the letter aloud in the dim lamplight, tears blurred the ink. I trusted them to cherish my home as they cherished my love, but they sold away the only history I had of my late husband. She folded the letter with care and tucked it back into the journal, feeling both guilt and relief. She was about to set the wheels of revenge in motion, but as the wind howled softly outside her window, Margaret wondered if the resulting storm would forever change her relationship with her daughters, if they could even find a way to repair the breach. Still, one truth remained unshakable. She would not go quietly into the night. They would know her fury. Early the next morning, Margaret summoned Sister Anna with a gentle knock. I need to create a mailing list, she whispered. Sister Anna, accustomed to tender confessions, nodded. Together they sat at the small desk and assembled names: Wilfred Thompson, the local reporter; Angela Parks, Peter's wartime comrade and confidant; the bank manager who had facilitated the cottage sale; and the notary public who had witnessed the signatures. For each name, Margaret had scribbled notes, addresses, contacts, and relevant details. It took 3 hours for them to finalize everything. As they worked, Sister Anna offered Margaret a cup of hot chamomile tea. Are you sure about this? She asked gently, concern flickering in her blue eyes. They're your daughters. Margaret exhaled. They betrayed me when it mattered most. I cannot let them erase my past without consequences. This is not purely vengeance, though it feels like it, but a matter of principle. If they can't face their actions, perhaps they deserve shame. Maybe then, they'll understand the weight of what they did. Sister Anna didn't press further. She only nodded and brought the tea. Margaret sipped, feeling the floral warmth calm her jittery nerves. She recalled how Peter had always insisted that integrity was non-negotiable. He would have been horrified at the thought of his home disrespected, sold for quick profit. With each sip, Margaret's resolve solidified. Justice, no matter how small, was her only solace. If it meant alienating her daughters, so be it. At least she would preserve her dignity. That afternoon, Margaret dictated letters to a volunteer typist, polished but blistering in their honesty. My home was never intended to be liquidated for profit, one letter read. My daughters orchestrated this sale behind my back, claiming concern for my welfare. In truth, they coveted the equity, choosing convenience over filial duty. She sent copies to the local newspaper, the bank, and the notary. Each envelope carried her unwavering conviction, sealed with red wax for impact. As Margaret stamped the final envelope, she allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. Her plan was in motion. The first domino had fallen. Over the following days, small tremors began to shake Elena and Sophie's worlds. In Chicago, Elena spied her mother's name in the morning paper. Local matriarch slams daughters over cottage sale. The front page article quoted Margaret's letter verbatim, complete with the photograph of the empty lot where the cottage once stood. The subheading read, "Family scandal erupts over nursing home move." Colleagues at the hospital approached Elena with hushed sympathy, asking if it was true. Embarrassment flushed her cheeks as she fumbled for an explanation. "It's complicated," she muttered, never imagining the story would spread so quickly. Meanwhile, Sophie found emails waiting in her inbox, formal notices from the bank, and legal threats from Angela Parks demanding restitution or a public apology. The children in Sophie's house, unaware of the growing scandal, bounced into the kitchen for breakfast. Sophie forced a smile as she made pancakes, her mind crowded with the potential costs, reputational damage, legal fees, the prospect of having to reimburse her mother's trust fund. The boys watched her with curious eyes. "Mom?" the eldest asked. "Is Grandma really angry?" Sophie hesitated, swallowing her pride. I can't explain right now." On the front page of the hometown newspaper emerged Wilfred Thompson's exposé. How the Harper sisters sold their mother's heritage, an investigation. In it, witnesses revealed that Margaret's signature had been coerced, her daughters arranging for her to sign documents under the guise of routine healthcare forms. The article included interviews with former neighbors who swore Margaret had never discussed selling the cottage. The tone was scathing, concluding, "When daughters exploit their mother's weakness for personal gain, justice demands reckoning." Each time Sophie glanced at her phone or Elena checked her email, fresh indignation welled within them. They began to squabble over blame. "You alone dealt with her power of attorney," Sophie hissed during a rare phone call. "You told me it had to be done immediately." "Don't deflect," Elena snapped. "You pushed for a quick sale so you could expand your mortgage for the new house." The rift widened as public humiliation took root. From Margaret's hospital bed in the nursing home, Lily visited daily to read sonnets of solace, unaware of the chaos unfolding outside. With her daughters reeling, Margaret felt a curious mix of triumph and pain. She had wanted to restore her dignity, but seeing them suffer hurt more than she expected. In the nursing home's common room, she confided in Mr. Blake while they played another game of checkers. "I thought I'd feel relief," she said quietly as she captured one of his black pieces. "But this guilt, this sorrow, feels heavier than my arthritis." Mr. Blake peered over his glasses. "Revenge seldom brings peace, Mrs. Harper. It's a fire that burns all who touch it. Are you sure this is worth the cost?" Margaret studied the board, considering his words. Yet she could not retract what she had set in motion. She nodded slowly. "I had to protect my past. They left me no choice." Mr. Blake offered a gentle smile. "Then perhaps find a way to rebuild. Reach out to them before the flames consume us all." His insight lingered in her mind long after the game ended. She realized that her vengeance had become a cage, imprisoning her in bitterness. That evening, Lily arrived and sensed the heaviness radiating from Margaret. "Everything all right?" she asked, concern knitting her brows. Margaret hesitated, then closed her eyes. I went too far," she admitted. "I thought I'd feel better. Instead, I feel desolate." Lily sat beside her and took her hand. "You have every right to mourn your loss, but you're not powerless to choose forgiveness. Maybe your daughters need you now, more than ever." Margaret stared at the wilted petals of the rose painting drying on her lap. The thorns she had painted once symbolized pain, but now she wondered if the rose itself, love, could bloom again. In bed that night, she penned a second letter, this one to Elena and Sophie, an unvarnished plea. "I acted out of desperation, but I regret the pain I have caused. Our family's bonds matter more than any house ever did. If you can forgive me, I will work to forgive you." She folded the note carefully and placed it atop the stack of pending mail. As sleep claimed her, she prayed that reconciliation might be possible, even if her actions had shattered trust. The next morning, an envelope arrived addressed to Margaret in a familiar handwriting. She opened it with trembling fingers and read Elena's reply. "Mother, I see now the depth of my mistake. I am sorry. I never meant to hurt you. Please know that I never realized how much that house meant to you. Let us meet. No lawyers, no reporters, just you and me." Sophie's note followed, echoing similar sentiments. "Grandma, I'm sorry too. We lost sight of you and the truth. I want to fix this. Can we talk?" Tears blurred Margaret's vision as she clutched the letters to her chest. Though the pain of betrayal remained, forgiveness felt like a weary balm. She lay back and let the morning light caress her face. For the first time since the scandal broke, she sensed the possibility of healing, a fragile bloom of hope rising from the ashes. Later that day, Elena arrived at the nursing home's front desk. Her eyes were red, her posture contrite. Margaret waited in the reading nook, the Robert Frost book by her side. When Elena entered, she approached slowly, as though fearing to shatter a fragile relic. They embraced stiffly at first, then more freely as tears sprang on both sides. "I never wanted this," Elena whispered. "You deserved better, Mom." Margaret held her daughter's shoulders. "And I never wanted to lose you, but I feared losing my history even more. Can we rebuild, even if the cottage is gone?" Elena nodded. "We'll find a way. Together." Over the following week, the family attempted cautious steps toward reconciliation. On a sunny afternoon, Sophie brought the boys to visit. The grandsons, now 14 and 11, bounced into Margaret's room, instinctive with youthful energy. They brought sketches they had drawn. One depicted the old cottage, walls shuttered, tulips still blooming defiantly at the doorstep. The other showed the new lofts rising where it once stood, gray against a golden sky. Margaret studied each drawing, her heart taut with emotion. She remembered teaching Sophie's older brother to paint tulips when he was a toddler, guiding his chubby fingers. Now her grandchildren carried that memory in their drawings. She placed a hand on each of their shoulders. "Thank you for these," she said. "They remind me that we cannot erase what we've loved. We can only transform it." The boys exchanged glances, young wisdom shining in their eyes. That evening, over a modest dinner of roast chicken and mashed potatoes, brought by Sophie, Margaret shared family stories. How Peter had built the cottage with his own hands, how they had celebrated weddings, birthdays, and summers under the oaks out front. The grandchildren listened raptly, absorbing the tales of grandparents they barely knew. Sophie wiped a tear from her cheek as she watched her mother's face glow with reminiscence. "Thank you for telling us," she said. "We want to know everything." Later, when the family gathered outside in the nursing home courtyard, Margaret felt a small wind ruffle her hair. She fingered the rose painting she had created in Part 3, still tucked beside her chair. The red rose emerging from thorns felt apt. Though life could wound, it could also produce beauty. She realized revenge had been a thorny path, but forgiveness, though fragile, might allow roses to bloom again. With winter approaching, Margaret decided to leave the nursing home and move into a small apartment Sophie had arranged for her closer to the grandson's school. She refused to allow her daughters to abandon her again, but also recognized that a fresh start might help them all. On a cold December morning, she packed her belongings, carefully selecting items she could not bear to part with. The framed wedding photograph, the Robert Frost book with Lily's notes, the rose painting with its defiant thorns, and the leather-bound journal documenting her journey. When the moving truck arrived, Sophie teared up as she watched her mother's wheelchair roll down the ramp, luggage trailing behind. In a rare moment of vulnerability, she whispered, "I'm so sorry." Margaret paused, looking back at the nursing home, its pale walls and echoing corridors. "I forgive you," she replied softly. "But let us never forget what we learned here about loyalty, family, and memory." In Sophie's apartment, modest yet warm, Margaret settled into a small bedroom overlooking a quiet street. The grandsons had already arranged for a bookshelf. On one shelf, photographs of the old cottage. On another, volumes of poetry and a small ceramic urn of Peter's ashes, which they had carefully retrieved before the cottage sale. "He's still home," Sophie said that night as they lit a candle beside the urn. Margaret placed her hand atop the urn, whispering thanks. She realized that while the cottage was gone, its spirit lived on in her family's memories and in Peter's ashes, returning to familiar grounds. For the first time since her revenge began, she felt peace. January's icy winds rattled the apartment windows as Margaret and her daughters attended family therapy sessions arranged by a caring social worker, Ana Morales. In the sunlit therapy room, with its pastel walls and comfortable chairs, Maggie Gonzalez, their therapist, guided them through painstaking conversations. Elena confessed guilt over prioritizing her career over caring for her mother. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said, voice quivering. "But I neglected your heart, Mom." Sophie admitted that her obsession with financial security blinded her to the emotional cost. "I never imagined I'd lose my mother's trust," she murmured. Margaret listened, her heart softening. She reflected on how vengeance had nearly consumed her, how bitterness shadowed every moment. Now, in the presence of her daughters and Maggie's calm guidance, she felt compassion bridge the divide. When it was her turn, she spoke of her fear. "I was terrified of being discarded, of losing every memory of Peter. But I acted in anger and wounded you. I hope I can learn to forgive myself too." Maggie nodded. "This is progress, acknowledging pain and owning mistakes. Healing begins here." Afterward, as they walked home beneath barren trees, Sophie gathered Margaret's gloved hand. "I want to rebuild our family legacy, on trust, not transactions." Margaret's eyes glistened in the cold light. "Then let us start with truth. Let our stories live in our hearts, not in contracts or hidden papers." They continued in silence, each step a soft promise of a new chapter. On a crisp February morning, Margaret received an unexpected letter from Angela Parks, Peter's wartime comrade. Angela wrote, "I remember your husband's kindness, how he defended honor above all. He would be heartbroken to see a family torn apart. I have enclosed an old photograph of Peter receiving a medal in 1944, standing tall, dignity shining even in war's chaos. May this remind you all of what matters: integrity, love, respect." The photograph, edges yellowed with age, depicted Peter in full uniform, eyes resolute. Margaret traced a finger over his medal, feeling a profound wistfulness. That afternoon, the grandsons joined Margaret and Sophie in the living room. The boys examined Peter's photo with reverence. "Grandpa looked brave," one whispered. Margaret nodded. "He was. But he also knew that true bravery meant protecting those you love and never sacrificing your morals." Sophie watched her mother speak with pride and sorrow entwined. "Mom, let us document Grandpa's story," Sophie suggested. "We can create a biography, include letters from Angela, and our own memories." Margaret smiled at the prospect of forging a positive legacy. Over the next weeks, evenings were spent around a cluttered coffee table scattered with old letters, wartime postcards, and typed transcriptions of Peter's journals. The grandsons typed on laptops, Sophie scanned photographs, and Margaret told stories of Christmas mornings, summer harvests, and long walks under the oaks. Elena joined via video call whenever she could, contributing anecdotes about her father's kindness to neighbors and the time he repaired a neighbor's roof in a storm. Each shared recollection wove a richer portrait of Peter, a man of compassion and honor. As spring approached, what began as an act of vengeance transformed into a project of remembrance. The biography, titled Peter's Promise, Love, Honor, and Home, grew thicker with each page. In crafting it, the family found a new unity. The act of preserving Peter's story brought healing. They were no longer defined by betrayal and revenge, but by a shared past worthy of celebration. March's thaw heralded the Harper family's first joint visit to the site of the old cottage. The property had been razed, only a flat lot remained, weeds pushing through cracks and a fresh layer of gravel. Margaret, wrapped in her favorite floral coat, gazed at the empty space where roses once climbed the porch pillars and Peter's handprints stayed in damp cement. She felt a pang, both sorrow and acceptance. Elna and Sophie stood beside her, silence enveloping them like a shroud. Elena knelt and gently pressed her palm into a patch of dirt, tracing a circle. "Here's where Dad built the porch swing," she murmured. Sophie retrieved the urn containing Peter's ashes. "Mom, would you like to spread him here? One final time?" Margaret hesitated, then nodded, tears tracking down her cheeks. She opened the urn, letting the ashes drift into the breeze. For a moment the world felt still, petals of memories swirling in a silent eulogy. After a time, Margaret whispered, "He's home now." The girls embraced her as the wind tugged at their hair. The empty lot, once a painful reminder, now represented closure, a place where past grievances surrendered to the cycle of life. A cluster of red tulips, resilient weeds that refused to be uprooted, thrust through the gravel. Margaret knelt and gently coaxed one open between her fingers. Its petals felt tender, but its roots clung stubbornly to the earth. In that tulip she saw hope. Though land may vanish and homes may crumble, love's legacy endures, rooted deep. With Peter's ashes scattered at last, the family turned their focus to the biography's publication. Lily, now a recent college graduate studying journalism, volunteered to design the layout. She incorporated wartime photographs, Margaret's letters of vengeance and forgiveness, and chapters written by Elena and Sophie describing their regrets and lessons learned. The grandsons added illustrations, capturing images of the cottage's interior, the oak tree, and the final lot with the blooming tulip. One evening in April, under a soft gold lamp, they held a reading of the manuscript's final draft. Each chapter rang with authenticity. The early years of Margaret and Peter's marriage, the joys of raising children, the gut-wrenching betrayal of the cottage sale, and the subsequent journey toward reconciliation. When Margaret read the passage about her moment of vengeance, dictating letters that exposed her daughters, she paused, voice trembling. Sophie stepped forward and whispered, "That moment nearly broke us all, but it also taught me to value honesty and respect." Elena nodded, adding softly, "I see now that filial duty isn't just financial, it's emotional." As they finished, silence settled over the room. These stories, raw, unfiltered, painful, and uplifting, reminded them why they had endured the storm. Margaret closed the book, feeling warmth spread through her chest. The biography would be published locally, raising funds for a new nursing home garden named in Peter's honor. Their ordeal would become a beacon, illustrating how forgiveness and remembrance can heal wounds inflicted by betrayal. May's sun bathed the newly dedicated Harper Memorial Garden in gentle light. Beneath a modest bronze plaque bearing the inscription, "In memory of Peter and Margaret Harper, who taught us that love transcends loss," a landscaped bed of tulips and roses flourished. The family, Margaret, Elna, Sophie, Lily, and the grandsons, stood together as the garden's caretaker, Mrs. Jacobs, held the ribbon. Nursing home residents, local neighbors, and reporters who covered the story gathered to commemorate the occasion. When Margaret cut the ribbon, cheering erupted. She wheeled forward, guided by Sister Anna, and beamed at the colorful blooms, roses in vibrant reds and purples, tulips in riotous spring hues. A choir of schoolchildren, including Lily's younger siblings, sang, "What a Wonderful World." Margaret watched their earnest faces, feeling tears of joy and relief. The grandsons presented her with a homemade card, a painting of the garden in full bloom. "Thank you for giving us back our family," they wrote. Margaret hugged them tightly, marveling how far they had come, from bitterness and recrimination to shared triumph. She placed her hand over her heart, where a single red tulip had been embroidered onto her cardigan by Lily as a gift. Within that bloom, she saw every thread of her journey: love, betrayal, vengeance, forgiveness, and renewal. Later, at a small reception, Wilfred Thompson approached with a gentle smile. "You've done remarkable work," he said. "Your story will remind others that no mother's legacy can be erased without a reckoning." Margaret nodded, her gaze drifting across the garden. "I needed to reclaim my narrative," she replied. "But in the end, I discovered that forgiveness writes a far more lasting legacy than revenge ever could." As the crowd dispersed, Margaret remained, breathing in the scent of roses and tulips, symbols of both pain and hope. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude, knowing that her story, once marred by betrayal, now blossomed into a testament of love, family, and the healing power of forgiveness.